My name is Emma, and I'm 26 years old. 3 months ago, my own sister tried to steal my house. Not by asking me. Not by arguing about it. But by taking me to court and claiming it was hers. Yeah, you heard that right. My own sister walked into a courtroom and tried to convince a judge that my home belonged to her. And for a moment, it actually looked like she thought she might win. But to understand how crazy this whole thing got, you need to know something first. This house wasn't just some random property. It was my grandmother's house. The place I basically grew up in. When I was a kid, I spent almost every summer there. My grandma used to bake these huge apple pies, and the whole place would smell amazing for hours. Back then, my sister barely cared about that house. She hardly visited. She was always busy with her friends, her life, her own stuff. Meanwhile, I was the one helping Grandma fix things around the house. Painting the fence. Cleaning the attic. Even mowing the lawn during the summers. So when my grandmother got sick a few years ago, I was the one who moved in to help take care of her. Doctor appointments. Groceries. Late-night phone calls when she needed something. I did all of it. Not because I expected anything in return, but because she was my grandma. And honestly, I loved that house. Then one afternoon, about a year before she passed away, she sat me down in the living room. She looked at me very seriously and said something I'll never forget. Emma, when I'm gone, this house will be yours. At the time, I didn't even know what to say. I told her she didn't need to worry about that. But she just smiled and said she had already handled everything. Apparently, she had updated her will. Legally. With a lawyer. And she made it very clear that the house was going to me, not split. Not shared. Just me. At the time, I never thought that decision would turn into the biggest family fight of my life. Because the moment my grandmother passed away, my sister suddenly started caring about that house at first. My sister acted normal. Or at least, normal enough. She came over a few times after the funeral. Walked around the house. Looked through some old family photos. You know, the usual stuff people do when someone passes away. But then things started getting weird. She began asking a lot of questions about the will. At first it sounded casual. Like she was just curious. But the more she asked, the more uncomfortable the conversation got. One night she sat across from me at the kitchen table and asked something that immediately raised a red flag. So, are you sure Grandma meant to give the whole house to you? I remember just staring at her. Because that question felt strange. I told her the will was very clear. Our grandmother had a lawyer handle everything. It wasn't some last-minute decision. It was official. But my sister didn't seem satisfied with that answer. Over the next few weeks, she kept bringing it up. Sometimes joking about it. Sometimes making little comments like, "Seems kinda unfair, don't you think?" Or, "I mean, we're both family." At first I tried to brush it off. I thought maybe she was just grieving and not thinking straight. But then one morning something happened that made my stomach drop. I got a letter in the mail. A legal notice. At first I thought it was some kind of mistake. But when I opened it and read the first line, my heart started pounding. My sister was suing me. She was claiming that I manipulated our grandmother before she passed away. According to the lawsuit, she believed the will was unfair and needed to be challenged in court. I must have read that letter 5 times. Because I honestly couldn't believe what I was seeing. My own sister was trying to take my house. And suddenly, what started as a few awkward conversations was about to turn into a full-blown courtroom battle. About 4 weeks after I received that lawsuit letter, I was sitting in a courtroom across from my sister. And I'm not gonna lie, it felt surreal. Like the whole thing didn't even make sense. I kept thinking, how did we get here? Just a few months ago we were sitting together at our grandmother's funeral. Now we were sitting on opposite sides of a courtroom like enemies. My sister showed up with a lawyer and a stack of papers like she was ready for war. Meanwhile, I was sitting next to my attorney trying to stay calm. But the moment the hearing started, things got even crazier. Her lawyer stood up and began explaining their case to the judge. According to them, my grandmother had been confused in the final months of her life. They claimed she wasn't thinking clearly when she signed the will. And then came the part that made my jaw drop. They said I had pressured her into leaving the house to me. Yeah. They straight up accused me of manipulating my own grandmother. I remember looking over at my sister when they said that. She wouldn't even look at me. She just sat there nodding like everything her lawyer was saying was true. And for a moment, I felt this wave of anger hit me. Because none of it was true. Not even close. I didn't force my grandmother to do anything. She made that decision herself. In fact, she was the one who insisted on talking to the lawyer. But the thing about court is, it's not just about what's true. It's about what you can prove. And for a few minutes, it honestly felt like my sister's lawyer was trying to twist the whole story. They kept repeating the same idea, that I had influenced my grandmother while she was sick. And the judge listened carefully, didn't interrupt, didn't react, just sat there taking notes, which made the whole thing even more nerve-wracking. But then my lawyer finally stood up. And the moment he started speaking, the entire mood in the courtroom shifted. My lawyer stood up slowly, calm like he'd been waiting for that exact moment. He looked at the judge and said, "Your Honor, we'd like to present the official copy of the will." Then he placed a folder on the table. Inside it were the legal documents my grandmother signed months before she passed away. Signed, dated, witnessed, and notarized. Everything was completely legitimate. My lawyer explained that the will wasn't written during my grandmother's final days like my sister was trying to suggest. It had actually been prepared almost a year before she got seriously sick. That detail alone changed everything. Because the whole argument my sister's lawyer was making depended on the idea that my grandmother wasn't thinking clearly near the end of her life. But now that story was starting to fall apart. Then my lawyer added something that made the room go completely quiet. There were also 2 witnesses present when the will was signed. He handed the judge another document. Both witnesses had signed statements confirming my grandmother was fully aware of what she was doing. And the lawyer who prepared the will had also written a note confirming she was mentally stable during the meeting. At that point I finally looked over at my sister. And for the first time that day, she didn't look confident anymore. She looked nervous. Her lawyer leaned over and started whispering something to her. Probably trying to figure out how to fix the situation, but things were about to get even worse for them. Because my lawyer wasn't finished. He pulled out another document and said something that shocked everyone in the room. Apparently, my sister had already tried to challenge the will weeks earlier. Quietly, behind the scenes, she had contacted the same lawyer who prepared the will, hoping to find some way to invalidate it. But instead of helping her, that lawyer wrote a statement explaining that the will was completely valid. When the judge finished reading that statement, he slowly looked up at my sister. And the expression on his face had completely changed. The calm, neutral look he had earlier was gone. Now he looked irritated. And that's when I realized something. My sister didn't just bring a weak case to court. She might have brought a dishonest one. And the judge was starting to notice. At that point, the entire courtroom felt different. You could tell the judge was no longer just listening, he was paying very close attention. He looked at my sister and asked a simple question. "Did you know the will was signed nearly a year before your grandmother became seriously ill?" For a moment, my sister didn't answer. She glanced at her lawyer, like she was waiting for him to save her. But the judge repeated the question. This time a little more firmly. My sister finally spoke. She said she wasn't aware of the exact date. But the problem was, that answer didn't make sense anymore. Because my lawyer had already shown proof that she contacted the same attorney weeks earlier asking about the will. Which meant she definitely knew when it was written. And the judge noticed that contradiction immediately. He leaned back in his chair and started flipping through the documents again. Then he asked another question. "Miss Emma's attorney mentioned you contacted the drafting lawyer before filing this case. Is that correct?" My sister hesitated again. And that hesitation said everything. Eventually she admitted she had spoken to the lawyer. But she tried to spin it like she was just seeking clarification. The judge didn't look impressed. In fact, he looked irritated. And that's when something happened that made my stomach twist. My sister suddenly started changing her story. Instead of claiming the will was written when our grandmother was confused, she now said our grandmother had been pressured by me emotionally. Yeah. She basically suggested that I guilted our grandmother into leaving me the house. The moment she said that, I felt this wave of anger rush through me. Because that wasn't just a lie. It was insulting. But before I could even react, my lawyer stood up again. And this time, he had something that would completely destroy that new claim. My lawyer calmly walked toward the judge's desk and handed him another document. Then he said something that immediately caught the judge's attention. "Your Honor, would like to submit a written statement from the attorney who personally met with the grandmother when the will was drafted." The judge began reading. And as he read, his expression slowly hardened. According to that statement, my grandmother had been the one who insisted the house go to me. Not because I asked. Not because I pressured her. But because I had been the only family member helping her consistently during her final years. The lawyer even wrote that my grandmother specifically mentioned my sister rarely visited. When the judge finished reading the statement, he looked directly at my sister. The silence in the room was heavy. Then he asked her one final question. Did you bring any evidence to support these accusations against your sister? My sister looked completely unprepared for that question. She glanced at her lawyer again. But this time even he didn't seem to have an answer. After a few seconds of silence, the judge closed the file in front of him. And the sound of that folder snapping shut echoed through the courtroom. Then he said something I will never forget. Making serious accusations without evidence is not something this court takes lightly. His tone wasn't just firm. It was angry. And for the first time since the hearing started, my sister actually looked scared. Because the judge wasn't just questioning her case anymore. He was starting to question why she filed it at all. The courtroom stayed silent for a moment after the judge looked through the last document. Then he slowly closed the folder in front of him. The sound echoed through the room, and everyone seemed to hold their breath. My sister looked nervous now. Not confident. Not smug like when the hearing started. Just nervous. The judge looked directly at her and spoke calmly. After reviewing the will, the witness statements, and the lawyer's confirmation, this court finds the document to be completely valid. My heart started pounding. Because I already knew what that meant. The property legally belongs to Emma. Hearing that sentence felt unreal. For months I had been stressed, anxious, and honestly pretty hurt by the whole situation. And now, just like that, it was over. But the judge wasn't done yet. He looked back at my sister and his expression turned serious. This case was brought forward without sufficient evidence, he said firmly. Then he added something that made the entire room even more uncomfortable. The court strongly advises against filing claims based on speculation or personal disputes. My sister's face turned red. Her lawyer leaned toward her, whispering something quietly. But there was nothing left to argue. Finally, the judge closed the case file and said the words that ended everything. This case is dismissed.